Hey, this is the Jim Walton from the Third Choice. It's so good to be back here. And today I have with me Dr. Esther Meek. Dr. Meek is a professor at Geneva College in Pennsylvania, a professor of philosophy. So, Esther, thank you for joining us today.
I'm so happy to be with you.
Yeah, it is fun. We just sort of need to start so people know who you are and they know who I'm talking to. She's a professor of philosophy. She's written several books. One of her most important ones is called Longing to Know. Got that right, Esther?
Yep, yep.
Good. What I wanted to talk to you about today was sort of the nature of truth and how we know God and how we know truth. And it seems to me that, when you really stop to think deeply about things, those are probably the two most important questions in life. Because if we can know God and we can know truth, we pretty much have the whole ball of wax there. Everything else is a subset. Everything else is a subset of that, of knowing God and knowing truth. And so, I wanted to talk to you because you wrote the book on it. And I, I want you to feel free to jump in as you wish. I had some thoughts this morning that I wanted to just interact with you about if I can. I pray so often during the days, through the night, in the mornings, before I get out of bed, and all through the day. I pray so often that God would teach me the truth. None of us want to fall for what's not true. None of us want to believe in things that aren't so, whether it has to do with everyday life and health and politics or decisions we make, but we don't want to do that about God either. We don't want to be wrong about these things. And so, I want to know God about as deeply as possible to know him. And I want to be able to understand my world and not only think clearly about it, but to think properly about it. I would hope that everybody has those thoughts. I would hope that I share with humanity that everybody wants to know what I just said.
Yeah, yeah. Welcome to humanness.
Yeah, so I pray that God would speak to me. For instance, right now we're being told, truckloads of contradictory things through the media, on the internet, and even in conversations with people. You know, I'm not there. So how am I supposed to know what's true about what any reporter or any politician or any businessman is telling me? I'm not sure I can trust them. And so I want God to talk to me. I want, he's the authority. I want God to tell me. And so what I want is in that time of meditation, that I would hear thoughts so clearly in my head, that I'll know it's the voice of God. I would even love to hear an audible voice, but that never happens to me. In any case, I want God to show me the way and tell me what's true. But that's pretty hard to discern. Those thoughts don't always come to my head. But what I was thinking this morning, and this is where you jump into the conversation, because I've just been giving you some framework here, that even though, if God were to talk to me every morning or through the day and put specific thoughts in my head, if I say, God, what am I supposed to think about this? And then he would tell me, that even though that would have a certain measure of security and objectivity to it, if God would just tell me things, that if that were the case, I would never really learn to perceive. I would never really learn to think or to discern, and I would never really grow wise. Instead, I think I would grow weak and dependent. And if I'm going to learn to use my brain and function in life, I can't just expect that God's going to talk to me and give me the direction and give me the answer whenever I ask or need that. I'll never learn to work at it, to examine, perceive, to weigh, to think, to balance, to recognize patterns, to discern. I'll never learn, one of the most essential life skills possible, that of growing in the truth. Now, your book that you wrote, Longing to Know, talks about knowing God and how we know God and what even knowing is and how we know truth. So I've just set you up for a 2-hour lecture.
Okay, well, I'll talk fast.
Yeah, no, just, yeah.
This might be installment 1.
So talk to me a little bit, how do we know God? How do we know someone? How do we know truth? How does
Sure.
it work,
Okay.
Esther?
Well, I think one of the things we need to do is bring our focus down to ordinary life and realize that, first of all, as humans, we're hardwired to understand our world and to understand reality. That's like Father Aristotle said this, that all men by nature desire to know. We just long to understand, right? And I define reality as God and God's stuff. So everything that there is to know, that's reality, okay? So the question is how we go about it. Well, I think if we look at what we're doing in ordinary life, we find out how we go about it. Because, and it's not about finding some sort of secret mantra. It's about studying the world and learning about it. So if I want to have a flourishing garden, I gotta, maybe take a course. I gotta go read labels at Lowe's. I gotta buy the right stuff. I gotta do the right stuff at the right time. I gotta watch my garden and see what's going on. And I don't ever expect my garden's flourishing to be an overnight thing that comes about as a result of somebody's information. Okay.
Okay.
So that gives us more the sense of how we relate to reality. That's what we're made to do. And when you think about what the Word of God is, first of all, we've got the Bible. But the other thing is everywhere your eye lands, you're seeing the Word of God. Okay, so He has already, in every moment, He is speaking to you. That's what Revelation is. It's not hidden behind it. It is this. So of course we desire to know it. But that means I got to go work in my garden. Right?
Okay.
So you should maybe not expect there to be too many Bible verses about it, because the Bible, we confess that it's sufficient, but we never confess that it's comprehensive. Right? So there's plenty of things in life that it's not the Bible you need to read. You need the gardening manual, for example. Right? But why would you want to work on your garden? Because that's a good thing to do with the Word of God. Right? So, but then what you want to do is go spend a whole lot of time looking at roses, and listening to those bushes and learning from them what it is you're supposed to do. And that is ordinary and beautiful, but also really frustrating at times. Okay? Because it's not the case that like it, as you said, it's not, never is knowing going to be some sort of information download. And what I say about knowing is that to think of knowledge as information is actually the wrong paradigm anyway. We should see knowing as an interpersonal relationship with what you want to come to know. And the goal of that is not comprehensive information, but, and I love this line, communion with the real.
Okay.
So when I finally figured out about the rose bush, that's the beginning of an eternal, joyous relationship with that bush. So you got to dig in the dirt, I guess.
Yeah. So when you say you know something, then what does that mean?
I think it means you have a relational acquaintance of communion with it. Information, it would be just well, as my friend David Schindler says, it's a decent substitute if you don't have knowledge.
Information is?
Yeah.
Okay.
But what knowledge would be, he defines knowledge as personal presence or encounter or just like I do. Intimate communion with reality. That's what we want. And
Okay.
that's what knowing is.
Because a rose doesn't have personality, I mean, you're talking about a personal relationship and communing with the rose. It starts sounding a little tree
Yeah.
hugging. You know, uh, you know,
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
how do we have that interaction with I mean, they're organic, but they're not conscient things.
What are they, the word of God?
Yes, because God has spoken nature.
Yep.
Okay, so explain what you mean
The
by
word
that.
of the Lord. Well, what did I say? Reality is God and his stuff. And when, let's say, you think about, I know you're in a office that is not yours, and so you pointed out to me that the things that I'm seeing behind you really aren't connected to you, right? But
Right.
if you were in your office would bear all kinds of marks of you. So I probably could walk into your office and know it was your office, right? You might even have a Harvey Cedars pennant up there, right?
Uh, there isn't,
Okay,
but there could be.
so you see this, what are we in? We are in God's stuff. I mean, there's no denying, he's not hiding behind it. This is his word. It's his word. Does the Lord want you to care for rose bushes? Yeah.
So how do we know God? God is to some very abstract. God is non corporeal. God is no one we ever see, and generally no one we ever hear. He's not someone
Mm.
who stands next to us. How do we know God?
Well, the way I argue in Longing to Know is that knowing God is like knowing my auto mechanic. And my particular auto mechanic in there, Jeff Dare in St. Louis, I never saw him. But I trusted him completely because my car would always get fixed. So that's part of the story. Was the whole point of his reality was he didn't need me to see him to get his job done.
Okay.
And what for me as a Christian believer, uh, trying to justify my own Christianity to myself as I grew up, all I could think was, why do Christians do this weird thing of believing a book to tell them about God when nobody else does that? And one of the things I argue in Longing to Know is, no, everybody does that about everything. So there is always, for every kind of knowing, one of the components of it is going to be an authoritative guide. You want to learn to read x-rays, you go to radiology school. And you can't hope to learn to read x-rays if you don't have a teacher to show you how to see what is there. And so ordinary acts of knowing all involve three things, actually. The authoritative guide, the place of your puzzlement, and your sense of things. Okay, so those are three sectors that come together in all acts of knowing. And in that respect, the Bible just is the authoritative guide for knowing God, just the way the radiology professor would be the authoritative guide for me learning to read x-rays, or the figure skating coach would be the authoritative guide for me becoming an Olympic figure skater. So there's authoritative guides throughout all of our knowing. If I'm going to be a gardener, I want to get the parish agent or the county agent to come out, and the master gardeners, to talk to me about how to do this or do that. So there's authoritative guides in all of our knowing.
I like that, but there are competing authorities that don't necessarily agree with each other, and
Mhm.
we have to somehow discern the truth. So when we come right down to it, then how do we arrive at truth, and what does it mean that a statement is true?
Yeah, well, that's good. Well, first of all, I argue that we never get outside the matrix of authority. So that means, with regard to everything, we're always having to discern the correct authority. And we might get it wrong. Okay. So just like with regard to Genesis, or any of the genres in the Bible, the first thing you do, and I'm just following Drew Johnson's work here. He was a student of mine. The first step is always to discern the right authority. And then your second step is always to do what they say. And then the third step is understanding. So yes, it's a big deal that first you want to find an authority that is reliable, but that's just how we navigate life. So my college students, when they're registering for classes, they've got to make a decision about what is a teacher that they want to study with because they want to trust them as an authority, right? And so you're spending your life navigating, well, who are the authorities that you think are responsible that you're going to listen to? So you never get out of that. But on the other hand, what I would like to say that truth is not information or correctness. I would say that truth is profession. So, or professional, meaning it is to say, like Martin Luther did, here I stand, I cannot do otherwise. So I take personal responsibility. This is my credo. Like, think about the Apostles' Creed. I believe, da, da, da. So all truth works like that way, that you're saying, I am committed to this, and I'm committed to it because I think that's the way it is. Okay, so it's responsible submission with universal intent, which I think is professional. And I would say a fact is a profession.
What do you mean by that?
Well, you cannot distinguish one category that doesn't involve profession from another category that doesn't. You can distinguish one category where you've got responsible profession from another category where you've got irresponsible profession. But you never step outside the matrix of authority. So to say it's not raining outside is to say, I believe it's not raining outside, meaning I commit myself to that, right? I profess it is not raining outside.
Well, don't I objectively observe that it's not raining outside? It's not just a matter of profession, but a matter of recognition, observation, and recognition.
But don't you see, you have to be taught how to see too. So,
Yeah.
So in other words, you're relying on the fact that over the years of your life, you have grown to have a confident ability to read outside the window, whether it's raining or not. And I don't at all want to make that iffy, because I'm just saying it is to assert something is to say, I assert it. you like truth just is somebody's assertion. And I don't mean that in a private way at all.
Yeah, that sounds subjective.
Well, it's what it is responsible. And see, one of the things, if you've got the modernist knowledge is information, correctness mindset, in there is no component of responsibility or commitment. What you've got is passive information that you're indifferent about. And that's not how you connect with reality. You've got to be committed to your garden as something that is there, that is worthy of your respect and your listening. Right. And so I want to say truth is bigger than what modernism has typically thought of it. And reality is way bigger than what modernism has typically thought of it. Reality is not two-dimensional yeses and nos.
So this sounds like it's going back to some of the things I led off with, and some of the thoughts that I had this morning is that, truth is found. It's not dumped on us. It's not just information, but we have to learn how to discern truth. We generally are not taught truth, even though you're saying there are authorities over us. But instead, even though when somebody teaches us truth as an authoritative figure, we have to learn to recognize which authority is true and which authority is not. So instead of just passively accepting and truth being dumped on me by an alleged authority, I have to find it and I have to learn how to recognize it. So truth is always out there, and what I need to develop is the eyes to find it and recognize it. And this even pertains to knowing God and knowing God's truth, because there are a lot of people who see exactly what I see and say, that's not true. But that's the same as in the media, that two of us can watch the same news forecast and the person next to me will say, that's awesome. And I'll say, that's not true.
Well, and what you ought to see then is that's the beginning, not the end of a conversation. Because part of what has happened in, and I keep talking about modernity. When I say modernity, I mean 1600s to the present. We are still very much caught in a strident modernism that it was set up in the 1600s. Okay, and there's a warped understanding of truth and reality that is our legacy because we've been born into the modern West, and we have to get beyond that. That is the sin of our era, and we've got to fix that. And what we have to see, one of the things that we have to see is that reality is way bigger and it is intelligible. Okay, and one of the things that modernity has done, this is what I was going to say, is modernity has rejected the other. Okay, so modernity is all about the deification of utility and usefulness. So what started modernity was humans like Father Francis Bacon saying knowledge is power, and something is only knowledge if I can use it for pragmatic ends. And so that defines modernity. It's all about usefulness, okay? Which means things that were deemed useless were gotten rid of. And for us to be able to manipulate and have mastery over nature, first we had to denature it and reduce it to atoms and forces, which means we show disrespect and disregard and dismissal for the things of the world. It takes a Christian vision to honor things, and it was rejected in modernity. So then what we do is we just say, oh, well, the stuff out the window is just stuff for me to use, right? So I can help myself to it. I can rape it. I can do with whatever I want with it because it's about utility, okay? Which is a total dismissal of the other. No wonder we had the Holocaust and other things like that, because humans are natural too. And so what we've done is reject the other. Whereas a true understanding of knowing and reality is going to involve, first of all, a regard for the other.
A regard
that
for
means
what?
that then we for the other. So you've got to have regard for your rose bush enough to listen to it for a long time to become wise as a master gardener. And that's ordinary knowing. And I'd say that's divine knowing too. Meaning, you know, you want to know God? Well, you ought to listen to him. You ought to listen for a long time, a long time, a long time.
Who was the philosopher? I'm thinking it was Hegel, but maybe I'm wrong, who tried to divorce knowledge from faith.
Well, you might be thinking of Kant, who wanted to limit knowledge to make room for faith. And that he's kind of the father of contemporary philosophy. And certainly of that divorce. And see, that divorce is embedded in modernity too. So in my book, Loving to Know, I talk about Esther's daisy of dichotomies, right? So we tend to think, well, knowledge as over against out on the pedal belief, or science as over against out on the pedal art, or reason as over against out on the pedal faith. right? So our modernist understanding of knowing is epistemological dualism, meaning we make these divorces. So if it has to do with faith, it can't be knowledge. If it has to do with knowledge, it can't be faith. Which
Right.
is, it's like you can't even get out of the gate if that's what you're presuming.
And that's the divorce I was thinking of. That one of the philosophers and who said that knowledge is sort of scientific and observation and learning, but faith really doesn't belong in the category of knowledge. It's a separate kind of hope and trust that has nothing to do with knowledge.
Right.
Which of course we as Christians reject totally, that perspective that of the divorce between what true knowledge is and what true faith is. We see them as perfectly integrated, that faith is knowing in every sense that science is knowing, just it's a different path that gets there. Am I seeing it correctly?
Well, the solution that was what I wrote Longing to Know to address, is the faith reason divorce. And what I think is you do have to work that out. And what you have to do is come up with a different understanding of how knowing works. And that's what I found in the work of this guy, Michael Polanyi, whose ideas about knowing, I hit up to show that knowing God is like knowing your auto mechanic. So I had to show how knowing works, and how it works the same for knowing your rose bush and knowing God. And that's epistemological work. And see, the trick is, in modernism has rejected as useless philosophy. So this is an anti-philosophical philosophy, which means nobody's trained in philosophy. They don't even know that it even matters. And yet what we struggle with, like, for example, in this faith reason divorce, the only thing that's going to fix that is philosophy. There is no Bible verse that's going to fix that. But if you get your epistemology fixed, it changes how you see the Bible.
Okay, can you explain what you mean by that?
Well, let me tell you a little bit about how I think knowing works.
Okay.
So stock example I'd like to start with is riding a bike. Okay, everybody knows how to do it. Well, when my father taught me to ride a bike, we were poor. He borrowed a bike. It was too big for me. He didn't believe in training wheels. He had every confidence that if he put me on the top of that bike and pushed me, I'd figure it out. So he took me to the top of this grassy hill, the back of our yard, and he did that. He pushed me and he yelled, "Balance." Okay, I was a baby skeptic. And all I could think was, well, how am I supposed to know what that word means? And I mean, that's precisely the point. How would I know what the word means? Balance. And then I was sure that no human being could possibly keep balance on 2 points. And so the bike made no sense to me. And my body was not working out for me at that point. My whole body was, like we say, all thumbed. So what I want to say is, when you look at it in an informational mode, it doesn't add up. Okay? So now I'm sure my father thought that when I got to the bottom of the hill, I'd be riding. Well, I can't remember the bottom of the hill, but I can ride a bike now. But presumably for all of us who now can ride a bike, there came a point where somehow we were able to shift from looking at the things that were meaningless to somehow getting inside them and seeing the pattern from these particulars that now were inside of us. So there was a switch from looking at to looking from. You see the same thing in learning to read. So before you know how to read, let's say a foreign language, but if you can remember kindergarten, you might have painful memories of looking at letters that meant nothing to you. Okay? And for you to get to the place where you learn to read, you've got to have shifted so that you're now able to attend from the marks on the page to the meaning of what they say. So Michael Polanyi, and he was this premier scientific discoverer, said, look, this is how knowing works. If knowing didn't work this way, no scientific discovery could ever happen, but it does. Okay, what he said is, all knowing has this from to subsidiary focal structure. You rely on or subsidiarily indwell clues that bear on a pattern. So in riding a bike, when you think of your last happy bike ride, you have this palpable sense of keeping your balance. That is subsidiary awareness, okay? And in that subsidiary awareness, it's palpable, it's creative, you're continually adjusting, but you're not focusing on it. If you focused on it, you'd fall off the bike, right? But you're relying on it, you're bodying it to achieve the farther pattern of the performance of riding your bike. The thing about the subsidiaries is, first of all, they involve commitment, trust, and at the point that you're trusting them, you cannot put them into words. Now, when Polanyi talked about that, I thought, that sounds like my faith.
Okay.
And that's where I started to make the connection. Well, of course, that's how, if you articulate keeping balance on a bike, there is a physics formula. There's a physics formula. But I could memorize the formula and it wouldn't have me keep it, the formula, my focal information of the formula is not what my balance is.
Right. You can know the formula and it won't help you ride a bike, and you can ride a bike and not know anything about the formula.
But your body knows it.
So what we're doing in our search for truth, I had mentioned before that we learn to observe and recognize and discern. And what we're discerning is patterns that correspond to reality, if I can say that. But we're also learning, if I can say it this way, and you can talk about this if I'm sort of right, that I'm also learning to synthesize, that all seeking after truth is a synthetic experience in that sense, where I recognize truth that I have affirmed before and affirmed and confirmed those truths because of my observation, recognition, and discernment. Yeah. And I take those truths and, like puzzle pieces, move into other truths and more truths and deeper truths, so that I'm synthesizing, never into a new picture, but always building off the old picture that was instilled in me from authority figures, right? So I'm never arriving at something completely new, but I'm always arriving in new places, right? So it's our job to recognize patterns, and on the basis of those patterns, to assemble new patterns. And that's how we grow in truth, sort of like a tower of blocks. Today's thoughts build on yesterday's thoughts. More than ever is that someone just dumps information on me and, oh, now I've got the truth.
Well, that's cool, but I want to ratchet it a little, adjust it a little, in that rather than seeing it as additive, see it as transformative.
Okay.
So what happens is, and this is part of what I learned from this scientist, is when you have the moment of insight, okay, there is simply no way you could have reached that from a linear addition of the things that you were looking at. Because what happens is that integrative pattern actually transforms what you had been looking at. It actually looks different. And so what I say, well, I don't want to say it that way. I'll stop that. I say that when I'm not being recorded. But in any case, when you get to the integrative pattern, it transforms what went before. So it is never additive. And that pattern is not reducible to the clues. And so that actually means, Jim, that it takes reality graciously revealing itself for me to ever have hope of insight. The best Bible story example of this is the road to Emmaus, right? So they're tootling along the road. This young rabbi shows up walking from Jerusalem, and he doesn't know what's happening. I mean, what? This is not adding up. And of course they didn't recognize him. Dead men don't rise again. If your aunt died and then next week you saw her in Target, what would you say? Would you say it's her? Right. So anyway, and there comes this moment when they take their eyes off his face and look at his hands, and he does what they recognize, and their eyes are opened. So we say their eyes were open to the breaking of the bread, right? So, and then what do they say? They said, did not our hearts burn within us when we talked with him along the way? So what happens is you've got this linear plotting, this groping in the darkness, and then there's this graced moment of insight that transforms everything that you were relying on. But the trick is that when you were relying on them as clues, you only half understood them.
So let me try to maybe pull together some of the thoughts I've had and some of the thoughts that you've said today. That when I ask God to lead me into truth, or when I ask God to show me what is true, in the same way that a lot of people pray for wisdom, just like James 1 says, if you ask God for wisdom, he'll give it to you. But the way that works is not with a dumping, but it's a process. When we say to God, help us to be wise, we are asking God not to dump something on us, even though we would love that. But more so what we're asking is that God lead me down a path of observation, recognition, discernment, synthesis, transformation, eureka. And in the course of that path, that requires a lot of anxiety, uncertainty, weighing, evaluating, wrestling, struggling, and concluding. And we all just want God to give it to us. Dump it on me, God. But what the real process is what we call life that walks in the path of wisdom.
Yeah. But I would add to that. That was a great list, but let's also add obedience.
Okay.
And because there's a sense in which I should not expect God's reality, and I'm talking the rose bush here, to reveal itself to me if I don't first promise to love, honor, and obey it.
You mean
So I have to commit myself to obedience to reality, to listen to it, to invite it, to reveal itself to me.
And do you mean by that I don't treat the rose bush the same way I treat my car? That's not going to work. I have to be obedient to the rose. In the same way I have to be obedient to the salad that I'm making. That's a whole different kind of
or the omelet
process, right? Reality,
and
each has its own sort of after its kind of nature.
Yep. And see, don't you see, you're conferring regard on the other that you want to know. So if you were just to demand information, well, how disrespectful is that? I mean, why would you treat your rose bush that way, let alone God?
Well,
right?
you would certainly not treat a friend that way.
Right.
Like just give the information and I'm walking away. And
bam.
That's why you and I spent a few minutes talking and being friends with each other before I turned record on today, because this is not just information gathering, it's communion, a word that you used.
Exactly. And oh my gosh, isn't communion the best word ever? I mean, don't you see, if you think of knowing as communion, how much richer and more three-dimensional that is than thinking of it as comprehensive information.
Wow, Esther, I really appreciate that you've talked to me today. This is great. I really thank you. Is there anything else that you want to say in closing that I haven't touched on?
Oh, there's lots. So thank you back, and maybe this is a first installment, but and yeah, it's really great to see you and have this conversation with you. So
Thank you, Esther. It's been great.